Monday evening. The children were already asleep in their rooms at the other end of the corridor. Matt and Lynn sat side by side in bed, pillows propped up against each other. He was reading a book about the Civil War. She was editing a marketing report. With a quiet sigh, Matt closed the book and rolled over to look at his wife. He always liked the way the tip of her tongue poked out slightly from under her lips when she was concentrating. The pen hovered over the paper, and she absent-mindedly brushed a strand of dark hair behind her ear. "Linny?" She answered without looking up. Matt waited, and after a moment she turned to look at him. "Do you love him?" Lynn froze and turned slightly pale. She looked at him silently. She just couldn't bring herself to play this game, to ask, "Who?" or try to lie. Matt deserved better. "No," she said. "So it's just about sex?" "Matt, she began, trying to meet his gaze. Then she looked down at the papers on her lap. "Yes, I think it's all about sex. Flirting, and then sex." "I see," he said. Silence. "I think I'd like you to sleep in the guest room," he said, his voice remaining calm and quiet. She nodded and stood up from the bed, slipping her feet into her slippers. She reached for the robe on the chair. "Unless, of course, you had sex with him in this bed. If you did this, then I will never sleep in it again." "No," she said. "I didn't do that." She wanted to say, "How could you think that I could do such a thing?" But that would be funny, given the circumstances. Without another word, Matt turned off the light on the nightstand and lowered his head onto the pillow, turning his back to her. Lynn looked at him for a minute, her face tense with pain. Then she quietly left the room, closing the door behind her. Friday evening. When Matt returned home, the house was full of delicious smells. He hung up his coat, and Lynn came out of the kitchen to greet him with a smile, although she didn't dare come close. She was wearing one of her beautiful aprons that she wore when guests arrived. "Beth and Jason are having dinner at the Frankels. I decided to cook us something delicious today," she said, trying to keep a smile on her face. Matt looked into the dining room. The table was covered with a tablecloth, with their good china and two of their best wine glasses. There were candles and cloth napkins in silver rings. Matt nodded. "It smells good. I'll go wash my hands and come down in a few minutes." When he returned, Lynn was just bringing food from the kitchen. She served each of them a portion of fried chicken, along with potatoes and green beans. On one side, there was a salad with orange slices in a beautiful bowl. They sat down, and Lynn smiled brightly at her husband, although the tension was visible on her face. "Looks really nice," Matt said. Then he slowly stood up and climbed onto his chair so that he towered over the table. As Lynn looked at him in confusion and then horror, he unbuttoned his pants and slowly, carefully urinated all over the table. He doused the chicken, the side dish, the salad bowl, and the newly filled glasses of wine. His urine soaked their plates and stained the tablecloth. "Matt, what?" Lynn exclaimed almost involuntarily. Her eyes were wide with shock and horror. Matt zipped up and climbed out of his chair. He looked at Lynn intently. "I thought you might want to know what it's like to have someone pee on something you care about, something you've put a lot of time, love, and effort into. I thought this might be a learning experience." Lynn didn't answer, just looked at her husband, tears streaming down her cheeks. Matt went to the closet, took out his coat, and left the house. Sunday afternoon. "I asked for a transfer," she said. "About? In a week I will be transferred to the internal marketing department. I wanted this to happen as soon as possible. I'll be in a building on Union Street, away from where I am now." "And why did you ask for a transfer? I thought you liked the international department." "Because I won't be there. Next to Douglas. I won't be in the same office again." He stopped raking leaves and turned to look at her standing next to him in her colorful fall sweater. "And why should this matter to me?" She looked both annoyed and offended. Because I won't date him, that's all. I wanted you to know this. She turned back to the rake. Lynn, you already told me it's over. Of course, I take your word for it and trust you completely. Can you think of one reason why not? She stamped her foot lightly and said, Damn it, Matt. Do you really think your sarcasm will help? Do you really think that moving from this office will make everything better? Like there are no motels and lunch hours and breakfast meetings? Or meetings with clients outside the office? As if there aren't plenty of other men out there who would love to fuck you until you lose your memory? Matt's voice rose to an angry tone, but he continued to rake the leaves into neat piles without looking at her. Matt, she said in a thin, sad voice. What else can I do? I'm trying to do everything I can, every way I know. She started crying. To show you how sorry I am, to somehow make amends to you. He turned to her again. And you think there is some way to make amends? Some kind of magic formula, just the right words, actions, or gestures? And will it all end? Get it, Lynn. You're living in a fucking dream world. He turned away again, returning to his rake. Monday evening, Lynn heard footsteps along the corridor, and then Beth's head appeared in the doorway, sleepy and confused. Mommy? Is that why you slept in the guest room? Although she was almost 6 years old, she still spoke with a slight breathiness, especially when she got tired. I stayed late at work, honey, and I'm here so as not to disturb Dad. Did you have a bad dream? Beth nodded solemnly, and Lynn jumped off the bed to hug her. Lie with me, Betty. You and Big Bear. She put her daughter and the bear cub with her under the blanket and lay down next to her. 5 minutes later, Beth was fast asleep again, and Lynn carefully picked her and the bear up in her arms and carried them to Beth's room. On the way to the guest bedroom, she suddenly changed her mind and headed to the master bedroom. The door was a few centimeters open and the room was dark. Lynn paused, trying to find the right words, but was stopped by an unexpected sound. It was crying. Matt, he was crying quietly, probably into his pillow. Lynn stood there, listening, then slowly turned away and walked back down the hallway to the guest bedroom. Wednesday morning, every day it became easier and easier to sit in the office and work, to concentrate on what needed to be done. His thoughts still wandered into painful distances, but not so often and not for so long. It was obvious to his secretary Bernice that something was wrong, but she guessed that he did not want to talk about it, and did not ask anymore, just smiled at him sympathetically. At 10:50, he got up from his chair, walked to his door, and closed it. Then he took the dictionary from the bookshelf and placed it on the table. He found the word he was looking for and read the definition out loud. A cuckold is a man with an unfaithful wife. He sat back down. I am a cuckold. He said this several times. The word seemed strange coming from his mouth. I am a cuckold. I was cuckolded. She cuckolded me. He sat for some time without looking at anything. Then, with a sigh, he put the dictionary aside and returned to work. Dia Saturday afternoon. For God's sake, Lynn, what the hell did you expect? Lynn didn't say anything, but her friend Arlene continued. They were sitting in Arlena's kitchen, 2 cups of coffee between them. You're having sex behind Matt's back with some other guy. Arlena saw Lynn wince at this word, but continued, and now you're surprised that he's angry and offended? I'm not surprised, Arlene. Does he know how long this lasted? Lynn shook her head. I have no idea. I don't even know how he found out or when. He doesn't want to. We didn't talk about it. Do you think if you told him it only happened a few times, it would have made a difference? For me, no. Lynn grimaced. I mean, if it were the other way around. If only he had slept with some other woman. 5 times, 20, I would still be torn to pieces, so don't think I'm surprised. I'm not surprised at all. I just don't know what to do. I can't reach him, and I don't know what the hell to do. She lowered her eyes, stirring her coffee with a spoon, and Arlene watched her silently. 3 weeks later, Wednesday afternoon. No, Matt said firmly. And then, a little quieter. No, I don't want her to tell me about it. The therapist frowned slightly. She had short dark hair, almost a beetle cut, and wore a brown corduroy jumper. Her name was Isabel Harshman. Don't you think this will help both of you? So you know why Lynn did what she did? Matt looked at her without even glancing at his wife sitting next to him. I think it might help Lynn to get it all out. But I don't understand how this can help me. Honestly, Dr. Harshman, I feel like I'm suffering enough as it is. Hesitantly, Lynn said, I thought that if I told you about it, about how it happened and why, then you would understand that I could never do anything like that again. Matt turned and looked at her. Do you really believe this? Do you really think there's anything you can say to me that will restore my trust in you, Lynn? To make me feel like I won't have to worry about you for the rest of my life, wondering when the next time you'll jump into bed with another man? Lynn looked down at her lap. She said very quietly, No, Matt, I don't think there's anything I can say to do that. 2 months later, Thursday evening. Oh, Matt, it's so beautiful here. She smiled broadly at him, squeezing his hand across the table. They sat at a table on the veranda overlooking the Caribbean Sea. The air was deliciously warm and the red hue of sunset still hung in the sky. On the table between them sat a pitcher of sangria and a plate of fried shrimp. It's beautiful, isn't it? His answering smile didn't quite match hers. There was some tension on his face, perhaps around his eyes. He squeezed her hand back for a few moments, then raised his fork to spear another shrimp. Thank you very much for agreeing to go south with me. Lynn knew it was difficult for him to hold her gaze for more than a moment. An hour later, they were making love in their room. Matt worked her vigorously and powerfully, making her moan. He held on for a long time, and Lynn achieved 2 wonderful climaxes before he sped up and climaxed with a loud moan. Later, they lay next to each other, Matt on his back with his arms behind his head, and Lynn cuddled up to him with her head on his chest. That was wonderful, baby, she murmured in a low, relaxed voice, and Matt reached down to rub her back gently. She seemed almost to fall asleep, but then she raised her head to look at him and said, It's not that I don't like it, but lately, it seems like every time we make love, you take me from behind. She giggled. Are you making me your bitch? She asked playfully. Matt looked at her, his brow furrowing slightly. He sighed. When we do it in the missionary position, He turned away. I watch your face, your expression, and I can't stop seeing you with him. Imagining you looking up at him is just... Matt didn't finish his sentence. They lay still, and Lynn suddenly felt a chill. A few minutes later, Matt stood up, pulled on shorts and a t-shirt, put on sandals, and left the room. 7 weeks later, Saturday night bow-out. They worked in silence most of the time, standing in front of the bookshelves on opposite sides of the room. Lynn sorted out their CDs while Matt worked on the books. He said, Should I keep the Dickens novels? I've read them all. Take it as you wish if you want. I won't read them. She pulled out another handful of CDs and placed Matt's on the small pile next to her. Then she turned and looked at him. She watched the muscles of his back move under his t-shirt, how his every movement was smooth and precise. It was all so familiar that tears welled up in her eyes. In a low voice, she said, You know, this is not what I want. I never wanted this. Matt froze for a moment, but didn't turn around. He held back his answer and returned to his books. He didn't need words. They both knew what he would say. Pibby weeks later. Sunday evening. Mommy, Mommy! Beth and Jason shouted as they jumped out of Matt's car and ran into the house to hug her, their overnight bags left abandoned on the ground. Both started talking at once. They told her about the zoo, that giraffes were their favorites. They have such long necks, and that Dad bought each of them cotton candy. Then, once they were done with their greetings, they ran past her into the living room and turned on the TV. Matt smiled as he walked towards the house, carrying the bags the kids had abandoned. Lynn smiled back. Looks like you liked the zoo. I couldn't figure out whether they were delighted or horrified. We came very close to the giraffes. They towered over the wall directly above our heads. And they also liked the giant turtles. It was a good day. They chatted for another minute or two. Lynn said, "Would you like to come over for a cup of coffee? The coffee pot is on the stove." No, thank you," he said, feeling slightly awkward. "It's really time for me to go." "Okay," Lynn said, trying to keep a smile on her face. "See you Wednesday night," he said, and turned to his car. She stood and watched him go until the Taurus reached the end of the street and turned left, out of sight. 4 months later, Monday evening, Beth sat at the kitchen table coloring while Lynn prepared dinner. Jason sat on the floor, putting together his favorite wooden jigsaw puzzle for the 500th time. It was a colorful clown and had 17 parts. "Mommy, should friends kiss?" Beth looked expectantly at her mother. Lynn turned to look at her. "I don't know, dear. What do you mean?" "Well, I never kiss Artie, Melissa, or my school friends." She grimaced. "It's so disgusting to kiss Artie." "But we met my dad's friend, and they kiss all the time." Jason looked up from the puzzle. "Angela's good," he said. "Yes, she is good. She cooked us hot dogs and macaroni and cheese," Jason interrupted. Then he lost interest in the conversation and returned to his puzzle. "Yes, and she also said that next time we can go for ice cream. But she and Daddy continue to kiss. You know, like you and Daddy always did. Do friends always kiss?" Lynn closed her eyes tightly for a moment. Then she opened them and smiled at Beth. "Well, honey, some friends kiss and some don't. It all depends on the circumstances. But kids your age don't kiss their friends, so you don't have to." "Okay." Beth nodded and went back to her coloring book. She made a duck, although it was very similar to a stegosaurus. "Dinner," Lynn called. "Go wash your hands." When the children returned to the table, she said, "At least 2 pieces of broccoli each. Otherwise there won't be dessert today." She watched as they put ketchup on their hamburgers and began to eat them. Then she returned to her bedroom and closed the door. She sat down in a chair by the bed, put her face in her hands, and began to cry.
Thanks for hanging out and listening. If you liked the story, hit that subscribe button and give us a thumbs up. Make sure to check out our other wild tales right here on the end screen. Catch you in the next story.